there is a finite amount of time inside the House of Commons, Mr. Speaker. And that is one of the reasons why I would ultimately argue, in order to be able to provide the support that Canadians need, Mr. Speaker, that we're having to bring in this motion because we want to continue to have the backs of Canadians. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Yes, the honourable member has 10 minutes and 20 seconds remaining in his speech, and I'm glad he cut it short. We'll now move on to the statements by members. Déclaration de député, l'honorable député.
The honourable member for Vaudreuil-Soulanges. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As members in this House, many of us remember a teacher or a member of a school support team who left a positive impact on our lives, and now they are leaving an unforgettable mark on the next generation, which means they are strengthening our country's greatest resource, our children. I am grateful for the hard work of the teachers in my community, Vaudreuil-Soulanges, day after day, even in regular circumstances.
Aren't normal circumstances, Mr. Speaker. Teachers who have always gone above and beyond have had to reach even further and deeper for more strength, courage, and patience, all the while putting on a brave face for their students. Over the last 2 years, the resolve and strength of our teachers and school personnel has been tested. And with most tests, Mr. Speaker, there's a grade that comes with it. And I want to let our teachers and support staff know, on behalf of this House and everyone who calls Vaudreuil-Soulanges home, you've given your 100% and you have earned and deserve just that in return. Merci.
The honourable member for Yorkton Melville.
Thank you, Speaker. As protesters mark their third weekend in downtown Ottawa, they are still waiting for an olive branch from this government. Personally, I would like to recognize the veterans expressing their love and commitment to our nation. Veterans have been a constant presence in our capital since they began. They've stood alongside truckers and families with their medals proudly on display. They've recited the Lord's Prayer and sung O Canada with Canadians from all walks of life. No one can deny the patriotism and passion on display. Soon we will vote on whether to end punitive federal mandates. Of even greater significance is whether our federal government will not only recognize but vow to cherish and uphold our fundamental freedoms, the freedom to speak, to believe, and to make personal choices protected by the rule of law, charter, and our Bill of Rights. Our veterans demonstrate that Canadian voices for unity and freedom are growing louder. Is the Prime Minister ready to listen?
The honourable member for Humber River Black Creek.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. February is Age-Related Macular Degeneration Month, which is the leading cause of blindness for Canadians over the age of 50. Close to 2 million Canadians and almost 200 million people globally suffer from macular degeneration, which is a progressive disease that over time takes the eyesight of those who suffer from it. It is very likely that everyone in this chamber knows someone that has suffered or will suffer from macular degeneration. Macular degeneration first starts with blurriness and difficulty recognizing fine details in faces. In its later stages, it leaves the individual legally blind, unable to see because of significant dark spots in their vision. We recognize that one of the most critical issues affecting our Canadian seniors' quality of life is the ability to stay in their homes and continue to live independently longer. But every year, countless seniors are forced to give up their homes and move into retirement or nursing homes because of macular degeneration, has stolen their vision and made independent living dangerous or outright impossible. Macular degeneration has no cure, but there are promising medical treatments currently on the horizon awaiting Health Canada approval. I hope you will also join me in recognizing the millions of Canadians who suffer from macular degeneration. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
L'honorable député de Berthier-Maskinongé.
The honourable member for Berthier-Maskinongé. Mr. Speaker, I am very pleased to support the week of continuing school. For many young people, it is difficult to stay in school because they are going through challenges and because of various social and learning difficulty reasons. And that is why this week it is very important to support them. Let us proudly wear the green and white ribbon to support these children during Student Retention Week. And we must also remember the remarkable support of all school staff who are helping people remain in school. If you stay in school, you can increase your knowledge, culture, and openness. And it also means increasing your chances of success and prosperity. So stay in school. We are proud of you. The Honorable Member for Longueuil-Charlemagne. Mr. Speaker, Ressources Saint-Jean-Vianney is a community organization in my riding which has been helping vulnerable people in Longueuil neighborhoods. This year, the organization is turning 20. And I would like to say what an important role it plays in our community. It helps young people by organizing sports activities and summer camps for them. It supports low-income people by planning collective kitchens. It supports parents by offering support and training services. And it decreases immigrants' isolation through educational and social intercultural activities, and much more. I'd like to thank its Director General, Lies Shekal, and his whole team for their hard work. They are dynamic people who are always offering the best of themselves to help our community. Happy 20th anniversary. The Honorable Member for Portneuf-Jacques-Cartier. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Now, the word resilience has been mentioned many times since the beginning of this pandemic, and I would like to mention an exceptional group of people, our Olympic and Paralympic athletes participating in the Beijing Winter Games. They have had to overcome many major challenges due to the pandemic. Getting to the Olympics is an exploit in itself, even during a regular period. So just imagine the efforts they've had to make today. On behalf of all citizens of our great country, we congratulate our 215 Canadian athletes. There are already 15 medals for Canada, and it's not over yet. We are all standing with you and are proud of your performance. And let's not forget our Paralympic Games athletes starting on the March of 4th. You are all an inspiration. And I'd like to thank our athletes from Portneuf-Jacques-Cartier, Flavie Aumont in freestyle skiing, Mia Fontaine, who got a bronze medal in mixed aerials. And tonight, let's watch Laurie Blouin in the snowboarding final. We are proud of you.
The Honourable Member for York Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, teachers are more than just educators. They hold the key to our future success. They instill essential values and passion within our youth. Without them, we couldn't cultivate the next generations of scientists, engineers, artists, and leaders. I want to highlight an incredible teacher in my riding of York Centre, Miss Cindy Law, who recently received the Prime Minister's Award for Teaching Excellence in STEM. I had the pleasure of congratulating Ms. Law and learning about her unique teaching methods and her passion for her students' success. As a mother to a high schooler, I know how important it is to have a teacher who inspires our students to excel and grow. Ms. Law motivates her students to think critically, collaboratively, and explore the natural world in an engaging way. Both she and her students have won several awards and achievements and are attributed to her success with her students. To achieve this and during the ongoing pandemic is truly remarkable and a testament to her incredible work as a teacher. On behalf of our York Centre community, its students and families, thank you, Ms. Law, and congratulations.
Great job. The Honourable Member for Scarborough Centre.
Mr. Speaker, February is Black History Month, and this year we are focused on recognizing the daily contributions that Black Canadians make to Canada. I would like to recognize one of my constituents that is making a difference in Scarborough. Reverend Denise Killard is a powerhouse. She is the force behind the Hope Works Connection, which brings arts to local youth through the Toronto Children's Concert, Choir, and Performing Arts Company. She is also the senior pastor at Kingdom City Church, an important part of our faith community. She is proud of her history. Her father came to Canada from Jamaica, and her mother's family came to Canada through the Black refugee and loyalist movements in Nova Scotia. She has devoted herself to empowering children and the people who love them to work towards fulfilling their full potential in the light of faith, service, and transformational living. Denise's story is Canada's story. I am proud to celebrate you and everyone making a difference in our community. Thank you.
The honourable member for Saskatoon Grasswood.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Today, I would like to salute those involved in the Pegasus project. It was a group of Saskatchewan automotive enthusiasts. This group raised over $1 million at the recent Barrett-Jackson auction in Arizona to support STARS Air Ambulance in my province of Saskatchewan. It was a custom-built, one-of-a-kind 1968 Ford Mustang 427 fastback, and it was auctioned off in hopes of raising much-needed funds for the STARS fleet renewal. This initiative was led by co-chairs Vaughn Wyatt along with Wayne Helleburra, who brought in Saskatoon actor Kim Coates and Humboldt Bronco bus crash survivor Caleb Dahlgren on board. So I want to say thank you to Barb and Gord Broda of Prince Albert for your passion in supporting STARS Ambulance, and may you enjoy the ride in your 1968 Ford Mustang.
The honourable member for Cape Breton-Canso.
I rise in the House today to address the protests that have spread across the country. Just last week, my constituency office received a suspicious package in the mail, as did many other Nova Scotian politicians from all levels of government and all different political stripes. Members of Parliament and their staff work hard in the service of their communities. Of course, we'll take criticism from time to time, but it's part of our job, and that's democracy. From a package with an irritant to border blockades and the occupation of our nation's capital, these are not acceptable means of protest. Rather, a disrespect of Canadian democracy that puts safety in jeopardy. Mr. Speaker, through you, I call on every member of this House to stand in solidarity against these unlawful acts. As parliamentarians, these actions will not, and I stress, will not intimidate us or our staff from doing our jobs. Mr. Speaker, all Canadians are frustrated. But as my father would have said if he was here, he would say, the point has been made. Now it's time to go back to your homes. Thank you.
Hear, hear.
The honourable member for Bay of Quinte.
Mr. Speaker, happy Valentine's Day. In addition to Valentine's Day, today is another day relating to matters of the heart, Congenital Heart Awareness Day. Every year, over 260,000 Canadians are born with congenital heart disease. It is the leading birth defect in Canada, affecting 1 in every 100 births. In 2015, my son Teddy was born with a congenital heart defect. We lost him to heart failure just 22 minutes after his birth. There are not many days that go by where we think of what could have been. My wife Allison has been a tireless advocate for women who experience the terror of infant loss and miscarriage. Her motto is always choose love, and she has a blog by the same name. Mr. Speaker, we could all choose love a little more. Please join me in bringing awareness and love to the hundreds and thousands of Canadians suffering each year from congenital heart disease as we work on a cure.
Okay.
The honourable member for Carlton Trail, Eagle Creek.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to congratulate Premier Scott Moe for being the first Canadian leader to announce the end of vaccine mandates. Today in Saskatchewan, anyone that wants to will be able to go to a restaurant and celebrate Valentine's Day with their loved ones. No proof of vaccination required. When making the announcement, Premier Moe stated, "The benefits no longer outweigh the costs. It's time for proof of vaccination requirements to end." I am pleased to see other premiers following suit. Unfortunately, the Prime Minister is refusing to do the same. Canada was founded on the principles of peace, order, and good government. When we don't have good government, peace and order become harder to maintain.
Absolutely.
I call on the Prime Minister to stop using the pandemic to divide Canadians for political purposes. I call on the federal government to follow Saskatchewan's lead and end all federal mandates.
The honourable member for Glengarry Prescott Russell. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to talk about the exploits of a young athlete from my riding. Valérie Grenier is from Saint-Isidore, and she is part of the Olympic alpine skiing team. The residents of Glengarry Prescott Russell are proud to support her. Valerie, you are a source of inspiration for all Canadians. During this unprecedented and unpredictable period, you have shown courage and resilience. You will inspire a new generation of athletes in our region. We are proud of your participation in the Olympic Games, and we will continue to support you in your career. Your hard work is what has led you to success in this sport that you have been practicing for a great deal of time. To all the other athletes proudly representing the Maple Leaf, take advantage of every moment of this unique experience and know that our country is supporting you. Congratulations, Valérie.
Member for Churchill, Kootenay-Aski.
Mr. Speaker, today, February 14th, marks the annual Memorial March in honor of missing and murdered Indigenous women and 2S LGBTQIA people. Every single First Nation, Métis, and urban community in our region has been devastated by the loss of a loved one who was brutally murdered or forcibly disappeared. As the inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women pointed out, this is genocide. 231 calls to justice must be realized, from ending poverty to housing, action rooted in the absolute need for decolonization. At a time where much attention has been given to the illegal occupation of our capital, we are clear that the systems of settler colonialism, including policing, are part of the problem when it comes to violence against Indigenous women. Today, we remember, we honor, and we recommit to pushing for action now. We cannot rest until no Indigenous woman, girl, two-spirited person goes missing or is murdered again. There must be justice now.
L'honorable député de...
The honorable member for Rimouski-Neigette, Témiscouata-les-Basques. Mr. Speaker, I am very proud to speak today about Saint-Narcisse de Rimouski's 100th anniversary. On February 13, 1922, an area was detached from Sainte-Blandine and gave rise to this new municipality. At the time, there was a desire to occupy the hinterlands, and that motivated the first people living there to clear the land, to work it, and raise their children there. 100 years later, there is now a proud community there, with strong roots, but also turned to the future. There is a central place of agriculture and forestry in this area, but there is also a great deal of tourism and a very busy cultural calendar. And it all says a lot about the festive spirit that reigns in the area all year long. For example, there's wonderful energy at the haymaking festival and the very famous snowblowing races at the Winter Carnival. It's great living in the area. And I'd like to wish everyone there a happy 100th anniversary.
Mount Dundas, South Glengarry.
Mr. Speaker, today Canadians are awaiting the vote on our Conservative motion calling for a plan and timeline to end all federal mandates and restrictions in Canada. For over 2 years, Canadians have done what is asked of them. They followed the rules. They did what it took to get us to a point where we can finally see the end of this pandemic. Other similar countries around the world have given hope and provided leadership by releasing their plans. Canada is one of the most vaccinated countries in the entire world, and that should be celebrated. And we should be celebrating where the science and data by medical experts is headed. Instead, our country has never been more divided, angry, and pessimistic. The Prime Minister created this mess by his tone and unacceptable language when attacking those who disagree with him. So today, Parliament has a choice: to provide hope and optimism with a clear plan and timeline to end federal mandates, or to plunge us into further chaos and division in a time where the opposite is needed. The country is watching, Mr. Speaker. Will the Liberals join us and answer the call for a plan today?
The honourable member for Mississauga, Erin Mills. I'll give you that one. Thank you.
My neighbors, my colleagues, our healthcare workers, for my country, I will not be bullied. These words written by Ms. Jean Yoon and countless Canadians over the past few days have become a rallying cry. Make no mistake, after 2 years, we're all tired of this pandemic. We're tired of not being with our loved ones, of seeing small businesses and communities struggle. We're tired of this illegal blockade that has terrorized Canadians and attacked our supply chains. We have sacrificed so much to be where we are today, and we will not back down. This is our obligation to one another, to do what is necessary to protect Canadians. It is time for the members of this House to start putting first their obligations to their citizens who elected us to serve, to put petty politics aside and to work together. Together, let's show an effective plan to see through to the end of this pandemic. Let's show what Canadians have proven, that we are united. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral questions. Question orale. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
The Prime Minister is planning to invoke the Emergencies Act to deal with the current protests in Ottawa and in some parts of the country. We know the protests continue here in Ottawa. We know the Windsor border has been reopened. We know that last night there have been arrests in Coutts. Section 16 of the Emergency Act refers to threats to the security of Canada. Given this context, does the Prime Minister think that these protests constitute a threat to the security of Canada? And if not, does he think that with this news he could be escalating rather than de-escalating an already inflamed situation?
The Honourable Minister of Public Security.
Mr. Speaker, these illegal blockades are hurting Canadians. We've seen borders closed, our economy crippled. We've seen Canadians lose their jobs, Mr. Speaker, and that's why since the beginning, this federal government has provided law enforcement with all of the resources that they've needed. In Windsor, the RCMP and Windsor Police have reopened the Ambassador Bridge. In Alberta, the RCMP made 11 arrests and seized guns at the Coutts border crossing. And in Ottawa, the RCMP and OPP have established an integrated command center with the Ottawa Police Service. Mr. Speaker, our number one priority is to end the illegal blockades, uphold the law, and allow Canadians to get their lives back.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
We've been asking the Prime Minister to stop dividing, stigmatizing, and name-calling people he disagrees with. Let them know that he listens and that he hears them, but he refuses to do that. Today we are voting on a Conservative motion, a reasonable motion that asks the government to present a plan for a reopening by the end of the month. This should be a time of optimism and joy for Canadians, not division and fear. Can Canadians count on the Prime Minister to do the right thing and today stand up with us, support our motion, and give Canadians the hope that they deserve so much?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, it does not really matter whether certain members of the opposition have been merely irresponsible or recklessly complicit. But what this country is facing is a largely foreign-funded, targeted and coordinated attack on critical infrastructure and our democratic institutions. The illegal border crossings are clearly intended to harm Canada and hurt Canadians. And our government, Mr. Speaker, is prepared to do whatever is necessary to restore order and to protect Canadian interests.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Well, it's clear the Prime Minister and these Liberals are still big fans of polarization, division, and negativity. 2 years into this pandemic, Mr. Speaker, Canadians deserve, in this moment, some optimism and some hope for the future, and they deserve it leadership from their government. They need to know when the federal mandates and restrictions will be lifted. That is not an unreasonable ask. So again, will the Liberals, will their Prime Minister, will their ministers, will the backbenchers stand up for their constituents, vote with us to present some optimism and some hope for Canadians?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, at every turn in this crisis, the Conservatives had an opportunity to de-escalate, to talk to those that were outside about dispersing and moving on. Instead, what we see is from the interim leader of the Conservatives who came out and said that they should continue this for political purposes. Right. The member for Carleton, who is currently a leadership candidate, out saying that he's proud and stands with the illegal activity that's happening outside. The member for Yorkton Melville saying that ripping down barricades protecting the war memorial was an act of profound patriotism, passionate patriotism. They're failing leadership here. Mr. Speaker, put this.
The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Canadians won't be fooled. They understand the political games of the Prime Minister. First, he voluntarily chose, well, according to his own members, people from his team are saying this, to politicize and to devise and stigmatize to win an election. Then he chose to politicize the pandemic, and that's what he's still doing today. Mr. Speaker, Section 15 on the Emergencies Act, in terms of Canada's security, could be adopted. How can the Prime Minister justify the recourse of emergency measures? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, blockades are hurting Canadians and they have to end. We're going to act responsibly. The RCMP and Windsor Police Force have reopened the Ambassador Bridge. The RCMP has arrested 11 people. In Ottawa, the RCMP have established a command center with local police, and our absolute priority is to end illegal blockades and to make sure the law is enforced and to allow Canadians to travel. Honourable Member for Mégantic-Lérable. Mr. Speaker, the situation is unfolding today, and it could have been avoided. The Prime Minister divided Canadians during his campaign, and his caucus is now divided. And he continued to hide for days instead of reducing tensions. People want things to be resolved peacefully. We don't want to see the army in the streets. Will the Prime Minister vote in favour of our motion and present to all Canadians a plan like all other governments have done? Thank you.
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, there's a clear choice for the Conservative Party to de-escalate the situation, to tell people that it's time for them to leave Ottawa immediately.
Okay, on est prêt à...
Are we ready to continue? The Honourable Government House Leader. On Twitter, the Conservative Party continued to applaud the illegal action that was taking place outside. The Conservatives may have their next leader who has said that he's very proud of the illegal action that's taking place outside. That is absolutely irresponsible. We are going to work very hard to put an end to this situation outside. The Honourable Member for La Prairie. The Prime Minister intends to invoke the Emergencies Act to deal with the occupation of Ottawa. He'll have 7 days to get the extraordinary powers he wants to be ratified by the House. But he refuses to say exactly how he intends to use these powers, yet the public has a right to know. We cannot wait for the content of the plan to drag on for 7 days. We're not going to give them a blank check when we're talking about extreme powers, including the use of the army. Will the Prime Minister reveal his detailed plan today? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, since the beginning, the Ottawa Police have acted responsibly in their response, and there has been logistical support, integrated command center with the RCMP and the OPP, and our absolute priority is to end the blockade and to enforce the law so that people in Ottawa can return to their normal lives. The Honourable Member for La Prairie. They've been doing nothing for 3 weeks. There are some things we do know, but we don't know what the Prime Minister's plan is. We know that Quebec is opposed to seeing the Emergencies Act imposed. We know that the crisis in Quebec has been much better managed than elsewhere in Canada. If the Premier of Ontario wishes to see emergency measures in his province, that's his choice. But does the government commit to not imposing the Emergencies Act in Quebec? The Honourable Minister of Public Safety. Mr. Speaker, as I've already said several times now, since the beginning of this crisis and of this convoy, we added resources to police services in Ottawa and in Windsor, and there's been a lot of progress made by the police. But now we have to reunite as members of this House and put pressure to end this convoy.
For New Westminster, Burnaby.
People in communities across our country are feeling the impacts of the occupations. Healthcare workers, retail and grocery store workers, truck drivers, small business owners and residents have lost their jobs and livelihoods and have been intimidated and even assaulted during these occupations. Where was this Prime Minister 18 days ago when this started? If he'd showed leadership and acted promptly, we wouldn't have to talk about emergency measures today. Canadians want to know why the Prime Minister let things get so bad. Why has it taken him so long to show any leadership at all?
Honourable Minister. Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And let me acknowledge the terrible impact that these blockades and these actions have had on ordinary Canadians. We've not only seen terrible disruptions to the lives and the safety of the people of Ottawa, but right across the country. These blockades have resulted in true harms to the people of Canada. We've seen idled workers. We've seen the interruptions to the supply chain of goods and services. And, Mr. Speaker, right from the outset, we have provided support and advice to law enforcement and to the provincial and territorial governments. But, Mr. Speaker, as this event has evolved, we have seen greater threats to critical infrastructure, to the lives and safety and interest of Canadians, and we are prepared to do what is necessary.
The Honourable Member for Rosemont-La Petite Patrie. Mr. Speaker, the reality is that this Prime Minister was absent since the beginning of the convoy crisis, and that's nothing new. He's been absent from the housing crisis, absent with the rising cost of living, absent in the face of the climate crisis, and on health transfers. Today, people feel left behind, abandoned. They want a Prime Minister who won't wait for the worst to happen before taking action. Why is this Prime Minister refusing to act when people really need help? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, vandalism and violence have upset the lives of Canadians, while my colleagues across the way have done nothing to ease tensions. They decided to throw oil on the fire, and our government has used the RCMP on 3 occasions and is now working with the OPP, and our absolute priority is to end this illegal blockade and to enforce the law. The Honourable Member for Bellechasse. Thank you. My riding has seen member people talk about the lack of leadership in this current government. Canadians who are vaccinated, well, they represent 90% of the population. We have the highest vaccination rate in the G7. We've passed a motion to ask the government to post a plan by February 28th so that we can return to normal life in Canada. Can the government commit to doing so? The Honourable Minister of Health. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'd like to thank and congratulate my colleague to talk about this plan. We have a plan that it is working. Like other countries in the G7, we have the lowest mortality rate aside from Japan. And in all G7 countries, we have some of the best economic growth. People are making efforts, and they've been doing so for quite some time. They've gotten vaccinated. 90% of people of all ages have been vaccinated, and more than 50% have received a booster shot. Thank you. The Honourable Member for Bellechasse, Les Etchemins-Lévis. Mr. Speaker, governing means making decisions. The lack of leadership has led to divisions within their own caucus even. We have to make efforts and sacrifices, but as it is time, like Dr. Tam has said, we have to reevaluate public health measures. Will the government decide to move forward, or will it continue to tread water with division and stigmatization? The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And speaking of division, I think in Canada, most people are not divided. On the contrary, they're behind the importance of vaccination. They support it. 90% of people have been vaccinated fully, and 50% have received a booster. And every day, 150,000 Canadians are receiving their boosters, and 10,000 people have just received their first dose. And I would congratulate them on making the right decision to protect themselves and those they love. That's particularly relevant. Thank you.
Member for Regina Louvain.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Today at Ag Committee, the Canadian Pork Council stated that any interprovincial trucking vaccine mandate would be very damaging to the industry and producers. Mr. Speaker, this proposal wasn't even considered at the height of the pandemic. Now Canadians are lining the streets in Ottawa, they're clogging major economic arteries, and they're getting pressure to the Prime Minister in every direction to ask when will we have a clear plan to move this country forward. I asked the Transport Minister, will he put on the record today that his government will not put forward an interprovincial trucking mandate for the trucking sector?
That's a good question. Minister of Transport.
Speaker, I want to thank my colleague for his question, and let me put on record today and every day
that our government will always follow the advice of our public health experts, will follow the advice of our doctors, and we will always do what is good for our...
No, sit down. We're not done yet. We're waiting for some silence.
I was silent, sir.
Yes, you were silent. Nobody else was. The Honourable Minister of Transport.
Mr. Speaker, I don't know why it upsets them when we say we follow public health advice. I don't know why it's so irritating for them. We will do what it takes to protect our truckers, to protect our transportation industry workers, and to protect our economy. And I know people are frustrated with public health measures, but we will do what's right because Canadians understand that this is for their own good and this is for the good of the...
The Honourable Member for Regina Louvain.
And I'm so happy to hear that answer. So I would ask him, what public health official is asking for an interprovincial trucking vaccine mandate for the truckers? What public health official is asking for more restrictions to be put in place?
Exactly.
What public health official is asking for more mandates and vaccine mandates across our country? So what I want to hear from him is, show me the scientific proof that this country can't move forward. Show me the data they're looking at where we can't reopen our provinces and businesses and let people get back to living their normal, everyday life in Canada.
The Honourable Minister of Transport.
Mr. Speaker, I know my honourable colleague knows that vaccines save lives, but I don't know if the honourable member can point out...
Okay, the Honourable Minister, right from the top, please, so we can hear your full answer.
So, I know that my honourable colleague knows that vaccines save lives. I also don't know if my honourable member can point out to a single doctor that can say the pandemic is over. I don't know if my honourable colleague can point to a single scientist that says the pandemic is over. We will do what it takes to protect the health and safety of Canadians. We will respond to the advice. When we ease measures, we will ease measures. When we know, but the one thing I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, an honest leadership tells Canadians that we don't know what the future holds, but we must remain prudent.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Nose Hill.
Mr. Speaker, as the Minister of Public Safety correctly stated, it was the Windsor Police and law enforcement in Alberta that are diffusing the illegal public infrastructure blockades that have traumatized Canadians. In fact, it's not been the federal government. In fact, the Prime Minister has been inflammatory at best and unresponsive at worst as this crisis has mushroomed and traumatized Canadians. How can the Prime Minister justify asking for unprecedented power through the Emergencies Act when he's failed to exercise leadership with the authority that he already has?
The Honourable Minister for Public Safety.
Once again, I want to thank the members of the RCMP who aided the situation in Windsor, and as a result now, we have an ambassador bridge that is reopened, which means that Canadians are going to get back to work and our economy is going to continue to roll on. But, Mr. Speaker, I'm quite surprised to hear my honourable colleague asking about the inflammation of the situation outside this chamber when it was the interim leader who said, and I quote, "Don't go home. Let's make this a problem for the Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker." That is how you inflame the situation, and that's why it's important that the Conservatives call on the illegal blockades to end so that Canadians can get their lives back.
Member for Calgary Nose Hill.
That was embarrassing. Canadians aren't looking for finger pointing. They're looking for leadership right now. This is an unprecedented public crisis, but the federal government has done nothing. They have not responded to the provincial government's requests for resources to end this crisis. And now they are asking to invoke the Emergencies Act, which has never before been invoked in Canada, and several provinces have already said no.
Good.
It seems as though that they want to invoke the Act to get provincial governments to shoot it down as a way of abdicating use of their existing powers, which they have at their disposal. Why are they doing this instead of taking leadership?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Talk about leadership when you see illegal actions occurring outside of this place, when you see border crossings and bridges being blocked, when you see these illegal actions, what is responsible leadership? I'll tell you, it absolutely isn't. Saying that you're proud and you stand with the illegal actions that you're seeing. It absolutely is not equivocating in terms of some of your members saying continue and stay and egg them on, and then say sometimes in the House maybe you're against it, and then tweet something that you're for it. That is not leadership. What leadership is, and what's exactly what we're doing every day, with patience and with caution and prudence, making sure we safely end this situation.
The Honourable Member for Avignon-La-Matisse-Matane-Matapidia. Mr. Speaker, people hate a void. So in the face of a vacuum in federal leadership, people have stood up to potentially dangerous occupiers because they feel that their government has let them down. Citizens, as brave as they are, have put themselves at risk because of this government. Citizens, after 3 weeks of chaos, thought they could only rely on themselves. Mr. Speaker, protecting the public is the basis of the contract between people and their government. Does this government realize the impact of its leadership vacuum? The Honourable Minister of Public Safety. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank my colleague for her question, and I agree entirely with her. It is a priority for our government to enforce legislation. We have to respect the rights of people in Ottawa, and since the beginning, we have supported police services with more resources, with more people, more officers, and we're going to continue to work together with all levels of government to protect Canadians. Thank you very much. The Honourable Member for Avignon-La-Matisse-Matane. We agree that there is a vacuum then. People have reached this point because since the beginning of the crisis, the federal government has been 3 steps behind. It took 10 days to set up a tripartite agreement with all levels of government, but they forgot to bring people make a spot for police, and it wasn't until day 16 that they finally created their own integrated command center. And today the government is talking about invoking the Emergencies Act, but they have no concrete plan to reveal. When will they take control of this crisis for real? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, since the very beginning of this convoy, we have taken a lot of concrete action. We had 3 deployments in Windsor, in Alberta. All police services were deployed, and even here, in Windsor, the Ambassador Bridge is now open. That's good news. It's proof that this government is making progress in cooperation with police services, and we are going to protect all Canadians. Thank you. The Honourable Member for Avignon. Mr. Speaker, for 18 days, the Prime Minister has allowed this crisis to escalate. Now he's announcing that he will invoke the Emergencies Act. But after 18 days, we've waited long enough for the federal government. The government must tell us today how it intends to use emergency measures. They need to give us a detailed plan, and they need to tell us exactly when they're going to put it into action. The public is running out of patience. Law enforcement is also. Mr. Speaker, what is the plan? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, I share the concerns of my colleague, and that is why we're going to continue to support police services on the ground with more resources, with all the officers that they need. We have to work in close cooperation with the City of Ottawa and the City of Windsor and with all the provinces so we can address this crisis. We have to protect all Canadians, and that is our government's priority. Thank you.
Member for Sarnia-Lambton.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Blue Water Bridge border crossing and the 402 highway in my riding are still being impacted by the lack of action from the Prime Minister on these trucking mandates. Provinces are listening to their medical experts, and they're getting rid of the mandates. When is the Prime Minister going to follow the science, listen to the World Health Organization, work with President Biden, and end these mandates?
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Minister for Public Safety.
First of all, I want to thank my colleague for the question, and I know that we've been working very closely with her community in Sarnia to ensure that the Blue Water Bridge and the port of entry continues to remain open with the support of local law enforcement, with the support of CBSA. This is a very critical moment, Mr. Speaker, and that's why this government will continue to provide the people, the resources, all of the tools that law enforcement is required to ensure that our ports remain open, to ensure that our critical infrastructure remains protected, and we have to continue to do that to uphold the law, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much.
Member for Prince Albert.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Provincial governments in Alberta and Saskatchewan have dropped the COVID-19 mandates. Both Manitoba and Ontario announced they will lift the vaccine passports March 1st. They, too, are following science. Will the government stop speculating and reassure truckers that they will not face new federal mandates when they cross provincial boundaries?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The opposition would like someone, perhaps the health minister, to declare that COVID-19 will end on a particular date. Unfortunately, that's not the virus operates, and that's not what science tells us. What science has told us is that we need to be prudent and responsible, assuming federal leadership. The federal government doesn't dictate everything. A lot of the restrictions to which the opposition is alluding are restrictions imposed by provinces and territories, and we're going to support them in whatever matter we need to do.
Honourable Member for Tobic-Mactaquac.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One of the foundational principles of leadership is that a leader should be slow to speak and quick to listen. We see a lot of talk from this Prime Minister, but not a lot of listening. Canadians are speaking clearly, and they want their lives back.
Yes.
When will the Prime Minister stop the division, stop the traumatizing, stop the name-calling and scapegoating, and instead start to listen to what Canadians are saying from coast to coast? Canadians are doing their part. When will the Prime Minister do his and end these divisive mandates?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Speaker, the Conservatives, the party opposite, has been doing a lot of talking, and I would pose back to them this very clear question. When the member for Yorkton Melville said that ripping down barricades in front of the War Memorial was an act of patriotic passion this weekend, when their aspirant leader is saying that he's proud of the illegal actions outside and stands with him, is that the position of this caucus across from us? And I would ask if they would stand up and condemn these incendiary tactics that are escalating this situation and join with us to say it's time for the folks outside to go home.
Hear, hear. The Honourable Member for Winnipeg Centre.
Mr. Speaker, February 14th is the Women's Memorial March in honor of murdered and missing Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirited. Despite the national inquiry, the final report, the Liberals' weak national action plan, the violence continues. Last week, I attended the beginning of the inquest into the death of 16-year-old Aisha Hudson, killed by the Winnipeg City Police Service. Her family and thousands of others deserve justice. This government needs to immediately stop political soundbites and instead offer meaningful solution. Mr. Speaker, when will this government implement the calls for justice and stop the genocide?
Full Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And frankly, the member opposite is absolutely right. We've invested $2 billion in the federal pathway, and as we approach in June to the first anniversary, survivors, 2S LGBTQIA+ persons are looking for results and outcomes. And so this is something that we say is whole of government, but implies every minister in our cabinet and then frankly everyone in this House to make sure that we're living up to our goals and the calls for justice, which are vast in nature, but first and foremost have to be trauma-informed and focused on those who are still suffering in silence and those courageously speaking out. We will be there for them. This is a whole of government approach. This is a whole of Canada approach, Mr. Speaker, and the member opposite is absolutely right.
The Honourable Member for Nunavut.
For too long, families of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit women, girls, and 2S LGBTQIA members have suffered violence, injustice while consecutive Liberal and Conservative governments stood by. 6 years since the Liberals came to power, and things are only getting worse. In May 2020, Pauktutit Inuit Women's Association of Canada announced its concerns for delays in implementing the MMIWG calls for action. They called for a commitment of federal funding of $20 million. They are still waiting. We need to make sure that organizations who support girls and Indigenous girls and women can do.
The Honourable Minister for Indigenous and Crown Relations.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And just this past Thursday, I was honored to stand with Rebecca Hulu, who is the president of ParlVu, and award her the award for Women, Peace and Security for her role in peace working and peacemaking inside this country. It isn't something that we do and stand up and say we need to do internationally. It's something we do need to do internally. If it weren't for Rebecca Kudlu and the organization of ParlVu, the advocacy perhaps around shelters in the far north and for Nunangat, including in here in Ottawa, wouldn't have gotten done, or perhaps not done as quickly. We have a lot of investments that we need to be made. They have to be invested in communities. They have to be invested in Nunangat, and I think
the honourable member for Pitt Meadows, Maple Ridge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Commercial fishers on BC's coast are at their wits' end. They managed to get through 2 years of COVID impacts. And now, just when things look like they might be getting better, this government is causing more undue hardship by slashing the Pacific herring harvest rate. This decision was made with no scientific explanation, no consultation, no compensation, no concern for the livelihoods of fishers, and including Indigenous operators. If the minister doesn't base her decision on science, what does she base it on?
The Honourable Minister for Fisheries.
Thank you very much for the question through the Mr. Speaker. And we are, on the Pacific coast, we are facing an absolute crisis in our wild Pacific salmon. Salmon feed on herring, and the herring stocks are very fragile to begin with. So that's why I took a more precautionary approach to the herring fishery this year, so that we could protect wild salmon and rebuild the herring stocks to its former abundance. Thank you.
Honourable member for Vaughan Woodbridge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As our economy continues to recover from COVID-19, Canadians from coast to coast to coast, including in my riding of Vaughan Woodbridge, understand that competition will be a driving force behind innovation, efficiency, and adaptability. Now more than ever, effective and modern competition laws and enforcement are necessary to promote affordability for middle-class Canadians, foster growth and entrepreneurship, and maintain resilient supply chains. Could the Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry kindly update this House as to how the government is modernizing our competition regimes? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Innovation.
Whoa. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank my colleague for an excellent question today and all his hard work on behalf of his constituent. Mr. Speaker, you know that our government is firstly committed to promoting a healthy, competitive environment in the Canadian economy.
We are.
That's why last week, Mr. Speaker, I was proud to announce that we'll undertake a thorough review of our competition laws, including tackling wage fixing arrangement, modernizing our enforcement regime, colleagues should be happy with that, and fixing loopholes, Mr. Speaker, that harm small businesses, consumers, and workers. We should all be happy about that, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Mission Matsqui, Fraser Canyon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and a little bit more of a serious question. Members of all parties have outlined in this House that British Columbia will need additional funds to recover from the recent disasters and to plan for future disasters. BC's appreciative of the collaboration with the federal government thus far. So my question today to the Deputy Prime Minister, will the upcoming federal budget include specific line item funds for dike and flood infrastructure, flood preparation and planning, and forest fire mitigation?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I'd like to thank the member opposite, not only for the question, but for his ongoing collaboration and hard work on behalf of his constituents. I also like to take the opportunity to assure the member that we are working very closely with the BC government, and we have made commitments to be there for the people of British Columbia, not only as they recover from the terrible floods of last fall, but as they build a more resilient community. We will be there to support them, and we're working hard with them to do so. Thank you.
The honourable member for Coast of Bay Central Notre Dame.
Since 2015, 5,500 jobs have been lost in the Newfoundland and Labrador offshore oil and gas industry. The Bay du Nord project has been highly anticipated in my province for quite some time. This project represents a $12 billion investment in our offshore and $25 billion in revenues over the life of the project. After 1,285 days of endless red tape, can the Environment Minister tell us when will the Bay du Nord project be approved?
certainly the oil and gas sector in Newfoundland and Labrador, just as in Alberta and Saskatchewan and British Columbia, is an important part of our economy. As we move forward, we are focused on ensuring that we are developing our regional economies in a manner that will promote prosperity and economic opportunity for all folks who live in those regions of the country. As the honourable member knows, the Bay du Nord project is subject to an environmental assessment, which will continue, and will eventually come to a decision. But we are certainly focused on ensuring that we are working collaboratively with the government of Newfoundland and Labrador.
The honourable member for Coast of Bay Central Notre Dame.
Right on. That's about what I was expecting. The government may be split over supporting this project, but the people of Newfoundland and Labrador are very united, with a weekend poll showing 85% support. After years of arduous environmental assessment, the Environmental Assessment Agency has given a green light to Bay du Nord. Will the minister respect the authority of the Environmental Assessment Agency and approve the Bay du Nord project? Yes or no?
The Honourable Minister of the Environment.
Certainly, as the honourable member would be aware, we are working actively with the government of Newfoundland and Labrador on moving forward with respect to economic opportunities that will benefit Newfoundland and Labradorian families. Just as we are doing that in provinces and territories across this country, we will continue to work collaboratively with Premier Fury, with the oil and gas industry, with the offshore wind industry, and other opportunities for Newfoundland and Labrador to increase and ensure the prosperity for its citizens going forward.
L'honorable député de Salaberry-sur-Roi.
Monsieur le Président, après...
Mr. Speaker, after 8 months of pressure, the government is finally admitting that it's heartless to cut the guaranteed income supplement for least wealthy seniors. As soon as the government admitted that it had made a mistake and that mistake plunged seniors into misery, the solution should have been implemented quickly. The Deputy Minister told us that a computer problem is preventing her from compensating victims of the mistake. Seniors cannot wait until May because of a computer bug. What will the minister do to speed up the compensation of senior citizens? The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we know just how difficult this pandemic has been on seniors, and on this side of the House, Mr. Speaker, we've been there to support them. And as announced in the fiscal update, we will be delivering a one-time payment to fully compensate those affected in 2020. Mr. Speaker, last week, we also introduced Bill C-12 to exclude any pandemic benefits for the purposes of calculating GIS going forward. And I'm calling on all parties to quickly pass this bill to prevent any future reduction in GIS for low-income vulnerable seniors. Mr. Speaker, this is something that we can all get behind, and I hope the honourable member will move forward on this. Thanks.
The honourable member for Salaberry-sur-Roi.
Une faute avouée.
Mr. Speaker, this mistake can't just be forgiven just because they admitted it. It's been 8 months that seniors have been making sacrifices. How can seniors endure months more of misery because of a computer problem? The government's proven that they can get the checkbook out quickly during the pandemic. When will seniors finally be able to do their groceries with dignity? What will the minister do to send that payment more quickly to the most vulnerable seniors? The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, our government's priority has been there to support those most vulnerable, especially those most vulnerable seniors. That is why we worked so hard to strengthen income security for them, including increases to the GIS that has helped over 900,000 low-income seniors. That is why precisely we introduced Bill C-12 to exclude any pandemic benefits for the purposes of calculating their GIS. We're also making a major investments through the one-time payment, and to get that money out as quickly as possible, Mr. Speaker, we're always going to be there for seniors.
The honourable member for Calgary Forest Lawn.
9 months before Kabul fell, 23 Liberal MPs sent a letter to the Ministers of Immigration and Foreign Affairs warning them of the danger Afghan interpreters and those that served Canada would face when the Taliban took over. They pleaded to help those families to immigrate to Canada with their families as soon as possible. Why did this government fall on deaf ears and ignore their own MPs and abandon thousands of Afghan interpreters and our allies, leaving them in harm's way?
The Honourable Minister of Immigration.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the honourable member for the question. I think it's important to reflect on the fact that during the fall of Kabul there was an absolute emergency, and we did what we could to rescue thousands of vulnerable Afghans who are now living in Canada. I'm pleased to share today that there are more than 7,500 Afghan refugees living in Canada today. The situation in
I'm going to have to interrupt the Honourable Minister of Immigration.
That's what I heard.
Okay, we'll let the Honourable Minister continue now.
Mr. Speaker, the reality is the fact that the situation in Afghanistan is so terrible that it's why we have made a world-leading commitment to resettle 40,000 Afghan refugees. I'm pleased to share with this House, Mr. Speaker, there are now more than 7,500 in Canada today, and we will not waver until we succeed in our mission to welcome 40,000 to our country.
Member for Calgary, Forest Lawn.
Speaker, they were busy knocking on doors, and there's no pride in only achieving 20% of that target, and the minister should be ashamed of himself for abandoning and also standing up for an election instead of helping those Afghans. The minister should be thanking the veterans, NGOs, and those in our NATO allies who actually stepped up when his government failed to. UNHCR testified that they had a plan to evacuate Afghan refugees back in January of 2021. This government knew about it and they ignored it. Why was an election plan more important than an evacuation plan?
The Honourable Minister.
I would like to take this opportunity to thank the veterans organizations, the NGOs, and the NATO allies who were helpful in rescuing Afghan refugees, some of whom are now in Canada. But the politicization of this event by the member opposite is a disgrace, Mr. Speaker. When he said I should be ashamed of our record on Afghanistan, I would remind him that he campaigned during that election that he just spoke about to bring precisely 0 Afghan refugees. Moreover, Mr. Speaker, if you look at their platform, you will see that they campaigned on a commitment to end the government-assisted refugee stream altogether that has resettled thousands of Afghan refugees who now call Canada home.
L'honorable député de Chambord-Saint-Charles.
Monsieur le Président, on apprend que
Mr. Speaker, December 30th, 2020, 23 Liberal MPs sent a letter to the Minister of Foreign Affairs calling on him to provide safe passage to Canada for former Afghan mission staff. For his part, the Prime Minister pretended in September 2021 that he didn't have time, the situation was moving too fast, he didn't have time to prepare an evacuation plan. But the Prime Minister said he had no time to do anything in September when the letter was sent in December. Why is the Prime Minister not listening to his own MPs? The Honourable Minister for Immigration.
Support of members of Parliament on both sides of the aisle in this House for their contributions to the effort in Afghanistan. I hope we continue to receive that support and advice from the conversations they're having in those communities. One of the things that came from my conversations over the course of that campaign was the opportunity to engage with the government to say that we should be doing more, we should be increasing our ambition. The situation in Afghanistan during the fall of Kabul is precisely why we've decided to step up and make one of the most substantial commitments of any country in the world to resettle 40,000 Afghan refugees. I'm proud we made that commitment, and I'm pleased to be the minister responsible for making good on it.
L'honorable député de Sudbury.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our government knows that immigration is critical to Canada's economic recovery. Rural and northern communities are facing significant demographic challenges. They often have difficulty attracting and retaining newcomers who tend to choose to settle in larger centres. Could the Minister of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship inform this House how the Rural and Northern Immigration Pilot Program is helping communities like Sudbury attract and retain more newcomers? The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to thank the member for Sudbury for this important question and the opportunity to practice my French. Immigration is essential to Canada's economic recovery. Immigration into rural and northern communities is an effort we have made. We've managed to welcome them in 11 different communities like Sudbury. These are people who work in our hospitals, our businesses, and they make significant contributions to our communities. I'm looking forward to continuing my work to welcome more newcomers into small communities all throughout Canada.
For Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hear regularly from Canadian charities working overseas about the damage direction and control regulations are causing. These silly regulations force charities to spend millions of dollars in unnecessary legal fees and obstruct genuine partnership by requiring donor control. So could the government tell us if they will finally listen to the sector and support our efforts to end outdated and neo-colonial direction and control regulations?
The Honourable Minister.
Monsieur le Président, que je peux dire à...
Mr. Speaker, what I can tell my colleague is that the Revenue Agency works with all charitable organizations to make sure that they respect the law and the rules. We'll continue to do our work. I invite my colleague, if he has any specific questions, to contact my office. Thank you.
Member for Northumberland, Peterborough South.
Mr. Speaker, for far too long, direction control regulations have limited the collaboration between charities and other organizations. That's why I'm proud to sponsor Bill S-216 in this House. Bill S-216 would replace direction control with an accountability framework that would allow for constructive and equal partnerships between charitable organizations and the communities they serve. It has already passed the Senate unanimously. Will this government commit to working with us to ensure this bill passes during the 44th Parliament?
The Honourable Minister.
Monsieur le Président, notre organisme va continuer de travailler.
Our organization will continue to work to end discrimination based on race, ethnic origin, sexual orientation, disability. Processes are in place to deal with these subjects of concern. Earlier this year, I announced a summit on Islamophobia. A systemic study is addressing the concerns of Muslim communities. I appointed a member of Muslim community to be part of our committee, and these types of actions will allow the agency to pave the way to a more inclusive future for our country. Thank you.
Saskatchewan.
Mr. Speaker, respectfully, that was a much worse answer than I was expecting. This is a question about direction and control. Again, to the minister, or some minister, we want an answer about direction and control regulations. Bill S-216 from my colleague has been before this Parliament and the Senate for years in the same form. Surely the government is aware of it. Surely the government has heard from someone in the development sector. So could we please get an answer to the question? Could we please get some good news instead of nonsense talking points on completely different issues? What is the government's position on reforming direction and control?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I want to reassure my colleague that the Canada Revenue Agency respects the rules, the regulations, and measures in place. The agency makes sure that people respect their agreements with the government. We will continue to work on that with our partners in the sector. Thank you.
For Etobicoke Centre.
Thank you, Speaker. Canada's support for Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity has been steadfast. We have been there for the people of Ukraine with economic, social, development, and military support. But with Russia's increasing aggression and with threats of a further invasion of Ukraine, I and many Canadians are more concerned than ever. Could the Minister of Foreign Affairs please share with Canadians what steps we are taking and will take to deter a Russian invasion of Ukraine and to protect Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity?
Honourable Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Thank you to my colleague. Of course, I can answer his important question, and thank him for his solidarity with the Ukrainian people. We're deeply concerned by the continued buildup of Russian troops in and around Ukraine. My top priority is ensuring the safety and security of all Canadians on the ground. I'm urging Canadians in Ukraine to leave now. We will continue to stand steadfast in our support for Ukraine and its people at every step of the way. Any further Russian incursions will face serious consequences. Thank you.
For North Island, Powell River.
Mr. Speaker, the Liberal government made a huge mistake when they cut some of the most vulnerable seniors off of GIS, on which they rely on to purchase basic things like housing, medication, and food. They feel hopeless, and they feel abandoned. New Democrats have been asking this government since before last election to fix this problem. Finally, the minister announced a one-time payment, but it's not till May. Seniors are in desperate need now to stave off hunger and eviction. So again, I am asking, will the minister support seniors at risk and immediately release emergency funds?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the member and her advocacy on this. We both share a deep desire to support those most in need seniors. I'm very pleased to share that we are now going to be able to deliver payments to those who saw GIS reduced ahead of schedule as early as April 19th. Service Canada will also be working with members of Parliament to help constituents in dire need to get support sooner in March, and we will continue to be there to support seniors through our increases in pension benefits. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to take a moment just to thank the officials for their extraordinary work, and I look forward to continuing to have these conversations with the honourable member. Thank you.
Member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ironically, 2 years ago today, the former leader of the official opposition said this, quote, "These protesters, these activists may have the luxury of spending days at a time on a blockade, but they need to check their privilege," unquote. It seems to me, Mr. Speaker, that we have a larger problem in this country of a double standard when it applies to how Indigenous protesters are treated by the police, how anti-Black racism protesters are treated. And I'd ask the honourable members and the minister if there is, in fact, a way to examine the double standard in policing and bring the implicit racism in the way we treat protests to an end.
Minister for Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank my colleague for the question. Of course, we always have the expectation that our RCMP and all law enforcement will exercise their duties responsibly in a manner that is respectful and consistent with the Charter. I would point out that over the last number of days that law enforcement, including the RCMP, have done an exceptional job, and I would like to thank them for ensuring that we can get our economy going by reopening the border, by allowing Canadians to get back to work, Mr. Speaker. And the only double standard that I think we're all worried about here is when the Conservatives are going to finally join with the government and call on the illegal blockade to go home.
I'm afraid that's all the time we have for question period today. C'est tout le temps que nous avons aujourd'hui.
That's all the time we have.
Comme il est 15h10, conformément à l'ordre adopté.
It being 3:10, pursuant to order made on Thursday, November 25th, 2021.
To the taking of the deferred recorded division on the motion of Ms. Bergen relating to the business of supply. Convoquez les députés.
Call in the members.
Merci. La question est la...
The question is the following one.
Bergen, seconded by Monsieur Berthold, moved that given that provinces are lifting COVID-19 restrictions and that Dr. Theresa Tam has said that all existing public health measures need to be reevaluated so that we can get back to some normalcy, the House call on the government to table a plan for lifting of all federal mandates and restrictions and to table the plan by February 28th, 2022. La période.
The 10-minute period for members voting electronically has started. And the House will now proceed to the vote for members participating in person.
All those in favor of the motion will please rise.
Ms. Bergen.